Hello, and welcome to the DDGP Academy Part 1. We're going to be talking about cinematography. In the world of video production, there are many roles, which is why it's important we define and understand what our role is. Cinematography versus camera operators. Camera operators typically tend to use tripods or gimbals, or it's just set up, or even electronic booms when it comes more technical. They're usually directed, whereas cinematographers uses lighting techniques, angles, camera movements to capture a more commercial quality video and audio content. They use things like rigging as well as specialized camera equipment to capture high quality footage as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Typically hired for movies, reality TV, and documentaries, where a producer is unavailable. While both do tell a story, understanding the difference between a camera operator and a cinematographer is to understand what is required to master your equipment and this trade. So next we're going to talk about lesson 2, which is the content. Every day we aren't shooting what could be considered consumable content is another life that's untouched, another day that passes without answering so many questions people may have. So we're going to go over your cameras and kind of give you the basics of what you need to study and practice in order to grow in your cinematography. We're filming a TV style series show, so hopefully these clips and images are giving you an idea of what that looks like through your camera lens. This is a run and gun, which that means that there's not much planning that goes into it. You have to kind of use your intuition, and there's very little room for error because those shots that you need to get are going to be happening in real time. This is why you're training as cinematographers and not just camera operators. A cinematographer is often the producer of their camera. They need to be able to deal with audio issues. They need to be able to make sure the lighting is correct. They need to know exactly when to turn up or how much is too much ISO, when to turn down or how much is too low aperture. They need to know when to open the iris and how much to open the iris. Usually on movie sets, these things are directed to you, or a producer with another monitor is there kind of directing you, and that's when you're a camera operator. But as a cinematographer, you're virtually the producer of your own camera. So you'll have to be able to control those things while action is happening around you. Time for lesson 4, mirrorless cameras. The mirrorless cameras that we're going to be using, Cam A is a Luminex GH5, which shoots as high as 4K, 6K in pictures, if need be, and a Blackmagic Pocket 6K camera, which by its name shoots in 6K and will be known as Camera B. The difference between a DSLR and a mirrorless camera is the light goes directly into the sensor, whereas on a DSLR it has to be bounced around. The result in a DSLR versus a mirrorless camera is the lighting and the shading and the image result that comes out, because it has to do a lot less work, which is the reason why it costs a lot more money. But then you have to control the lighting a lot more, where the sun can change and you might get too blown out of an image or too burn out of an image. So within a 30-minute span of time, you have to make sure you're taking the time to focus on your lighting and changing it so that it matches. Best way to do that is practice. Make a mental note or record in your notebook the lighting settings and the time of day that you use them to fast track getting a handle on this very important skill. Lesson 5, lenses. This one's a bit of a doozy because there are so many lenses for so many different reasons. The ones that we mainly use are zoom lenses, telephoto, prime, macro, or wide angle lenses. What does that all mean? The basic understanding and principle is kind of like a television. The bigger the television, the further away you have to sit in order to really get the best image quality out of it. Well, these wide angle lenses kind of work in the same way, where they give you a broad span of what you're looking at, even if you're standing from a long distance. And then we have these long lenses which allow you to see much further, given the name long lens, right? We have glass lenses that we use, and then we use variable zoom lenses. A glass lens is going to bring in a lot more light and lower light settings. That number and letter that you're seeing there is called an f-stop. Glass lenses have a much wider f-stop than the variable zoom lenses that we have, but in trade, the variable zoom lens, even though it's better during the daytime, gives us a wider angle and much more view that we can see in the lens itself. In our final section of part 1, we're going to talk about FPS. FPS stands for frames per second. 24 frames per second is real time, 60 frames per second is slow motion, like if a car's driving by, and then 120 frames per second is what we consider an action slow motion. It's things like waves and fire, anything that's moving really fast. But here's the thing, while you're recording, it'll look like it's moving very quickly. However, upon playback, it'll play in a slow motion. So here's the basic idea. This is what we see with our eyes, between 60 and 24 frames per second. That was in real time. Now this is what it kind of looks like slowed down. The reason why we don't slow down footage shot in 24 frames per second is because it's choppy. We have to speed those frames up in order to slow it down so it still stays smooth, which is why we do the slow motion or super slow motion. 24 frames per second is reserved for real time, things where you need to make sure you're getting audio that makes sense. Whereas 60 frames per second is for something like a car going by that you know you're going to slow down later, which means you have to be prepared. So that concludes the DDG Academy Training Part 1, Cinematography. Remember to stay safe, stay creative, have fun, and trust the process.